Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Those of you just walking in, do keep walking forward, find yourself a seat. There are still a few left. Actually, I'm delighted to see the auditorium looking very well populated. Thank you so much for coming. I suspect you're here because you know this is going to be a really fascinating session. I've been looking forward to this one, and I suspect many of you have too. As you will be well aware, our subject matter captured in the title is the De-Oligarchization initiative a good step for Ukraine? I think one bad step for Ukraine is introducing the word de-oligarchization because it's almost impossible to say. But leaving that aside, it is an extraordinarily important issue. And I'm delighted to say that we have a panel and a format today which is going to give you the very best insights and overview of what is happening in Ukraine. And by that, I mean, I'm not going to lead the discussion, so cue a sigh of relief from all of you. I'm here as a sort of overseer and asker of idiot questions, but the debate that you're about to hear is actually going to be moderated by Vladislav Rashkovan, who many of you will know. He's a partner at SD Capital. He has a long background in finance in Ukraine. He also has many associations with the IMF and their work in Ukraine. So Vladislav is extremely well qualified to lead this debate. And we've got a panel of three who are key players with different perspectives in this whole debate about the role of the quote-unquote oligarchs in Ukrainian political culture and society. I'll introduce them by just going along the panel. Closest to me, we have Oleksiy Danilov, who is Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, a former regional governor, a former MP. Next, we have Darin Acemoglu, who many of you will know is one of America's most influential economists, longtime professor at MIT, writer of influential books, including Why Nations Fail, which became something of a cult book around the world, I think after it came out in 2012. So welcome to Darin. And then we have, of course, Ukraine's Minister of Justice. Welcome to you, Minister Denis Malyuska, again, a familiar figure to many of you. So I think you'll agree we've got a terrific panel. As I say, my job is to take a bit of a back seat, but to ask questions and to draw you guys in, the audience, into the debate by getting you to ask questions. That's one of my favorite things to do here at YES conferences. But for now, I'm going to take a little bit of a back seat and hand right over to Vladislav. So over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. It's really a privilege to be, the moderator today, also with you and also with such a distinguished panel. And I also believe I'm only one Ukrainian who is moderating the sessions during the YES conference this year. And I should probably make two small disclaimers. One is I'm personally a protagonist, so I'm in favor of, anti-oligarchic, actions in Ukraine. I strongly believe that the oligarchy has brought some difficulties in Ukraine. But I'm also, from another side, an institutionalist. So I'm really in favor of using the institutions and in order to build a better system in Ukraine. So I think we have an excellent discussion today because we hope we will have an excellent discussion today because we have really the great specialist on that. And probably to start, let's try to define what is an oligarch or who is an oligarch. And Oleksiy, що для вас олігарх в Україні? Як ви це можете?
Oleksiy, how would you define oligarch?
Obviously, Oleksiy is going to speak in Ukrainian, so those of us who are not fluent in the language, you've got your earpieces and do use them.
Звідки ви знаєте, що зайду далеко?
Well, how do you know that I would...
А так буду, що про мене.
Well, Yeah, well, dear colleagues, I think that we sometimes confuse things when we say that oligarchs are person. We make a fallacy, so to speak, oligarchic and clan system, as we have in our country, is a threat to all of us, to our existence. And it all started way ago in 1998, if I'm not mistaken. Oligarchs, big money came to the parliament. Since that time, we have had quite difficult times in trying to get our country up and running. Oligarch, as it were, has three pillars: oligarchs, monopolies, and corruption. Unless we do away with this triangle, with these three pillars, we won't be able to see our country grow and develop. What we see in Donbass or in Crimea are consequences of the oligarchic model of the nation building. I am very thankful to the conveners for having invited me to take part. Yes, and of course, I am grateful to all those who decided to take part in our discussion, to listen to it, and I'm sure that other panelists will make very useful contributions.
What for you, the oligarchy?
Thank you, Vlad. Well, it's going to be the first time in the history of Ukraine and maybe in the history of the world when the word oligarch is going to be a legal term with a legal definition and with clear and transparent criteria. And it's innovation since, as far as I know, historically, there were two types of dealing with oligarch issue. First one was evolutionary, when step by step, by increasing the powers of anti-monopoly bodies, by regulating lobbying activities, etc., step by step, the power of oligarchs was decreasing in certain countries, for instance, in the US. The second way was just to crush oligarchs, and that happened, for instance, in Russia, when oligarchs were illegally crushed by mighty enforcement agencies, and that had some consequences. For instance, arbitration decisions in Yuko's case, etc. But money were transferred to friends of Putin. Ukraine is intending to introduce the third way, a legal one, by introducing a framework, legal framework, for dealing with oligarchs. And according to the draft law submitted by the president, there will be 4 criteria for oligarchs. And if a person meets 3 out of 4 criteria, then such a person will be recognized and dealt with as oligarchs. And among those 4 criteria are involvement in politics, ownership of media ownership, assets, significant economic assets, and monopoly. If a person meets 3 out of 4 criteria, then such a person is recognized as oligarch. So it's innovation, and it's a quite legalistic approach, and I'm in favor of it.
Okay, thanks, Darren. Do you agree with the definition, or what do you have? What is your definition of oligarchy?
Well, let me first say, we are living through an age throughout the world, not just Ukraine, where the power of big business has never been greater. Humanity has never seen corporations as big as Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon. The problem of oligarchy is one in Russia, in Turkey, in Ukraine, obviously. So we have to think about new institutional ways of counterbalancing the power of big business. So whether you call Jeff Bezos an oligarch or not, it matters to me less than how are we going to contain the power of such structures. And that power takes many different forms. I think when you look at Google, in the US, for example. It has a lot of soft power. It doesn't run the government, but it has a huge influence on the government. The Defense Department, the Education Department, the President, they want input from Google because they have emerged as big experts on many things, and they have a huge amount of prestige and power in the economy. But in some other countries, it takes a more pernicious form. When oligarchs or when big businesses are able to control the judicial system, they're able to control the bureaucracies that are supposed to regulate them. And again, I don't think it's unique to Ukraine. It happens to some degree in a softer form in the US and in other advanced economies as well. But it does become a problem. So I think tackling it is first order. And I completely agree with you, Vlad. I am an institutionalist too. It's much better to do that via institutions. Existing institutions, for example, antitrust laws, enforcement, those will be better. But then the question becomes, well, what happens if we don't have those institutions? How do you build institutions? And institutions building, unfortunately, contradicts with being institutionalist at some level because it's not an orderly, nice process. Sometimes you need to take actions that are more radical in building institutions. And that, I think, is the danger of dealing with oligarchs, which is that in dealing with oligarchs, can we make sure that we don't destroy the institutions? So I think it is a first-order issue that everywhere around the world, and especially in Ukraine, we have to start thinking about building better institutions. And I think in some ways, this current proposal is going in the right direction. But then there are also issues that worry me, precisely because in trying to build institutions, there are dangers that we could actually be destroying them, and I guess we're going to come back to some of them later.
Yeah, we will discuss that. I mean, you mentioned that also in many countries the oligarchy is there. So from your perspective, who is in US, who is a more oligarch, like a Koch or Google?
Well, I don't know whether I want to draw a distinction. The Koch Industries has been much more involved in politics. And in some way, they have really been very influential in funding right-wing groups, Federalist Society, Cato, Heritage Foundation, and, the judicial turn in the US towards the right is very much an influence of the Koch Industries as well as others. But on the other hand, I think Google has a much bigger control over the economy and soft power. So I don't think you have to sort of just go through, well, are they directly involved in politics? Sergey Brin, Eric Schmidt, Larry Page, they're not directly involved in politics. They don't control politicians, but they still have a lot of power. So that's why I think it's very important to think about antitrust, other ways in which you can regulate the power of big businesses, and then also deal with issues that really border on criminality. For example, organic links with politicians, with the judicial system, with the enforcement agencies. But that's an orderly way of dealing with it, and sometimes orderly ways of dealing with these issues may not be possible.
Can I just make a very brief intervention, and it's a question based on ignorance, but Justice Minister, you make it sound like there's some sort of forensic way, given your 4 criteria, of defining who is an oligarch in Ukraine today. So I've read reports of lists, the official list of oligarchs being drawn up, and given the criteria and, the threshold of whatever it is, $80-something million of wealth, qualifying, being one key criteria for qualifying, is there now an official list of oligarchs? How many people are on it? And is that really useful? Because in this discussion we're already having about the balance between institutional approaches and then the targeting of individuals, is it useful to have a very public list of the oligarchs in a particular country, in this case Ukraine?
Thanks for the question. No, there is no any official list of oligarchs, and our idea is not to go and follow some certain people with certain names. No, we are talking about honest, clear, and transparent criteria, and only after those criteria are adopted by the parliament, there will be a grace period of 6 months during which a person feeling that that he or she meets such a criteria could stop being oligarch by stopping involving in politics, or by transferring media, or like stopping financing officially or unofficially political parties, etc.
So you mean, whoa, this is so interesting. So you mean like having it passed this bill through the parliament, you're giving a grace period because the implication is you really don't want to be on this list, people.
Exactly.
And if you don't change your behaviors, i.e. get out of politics, get out of the media, there will be very big problems for you coming right up. Is that the message?
Yeah, a bit like that, but just a couple of words. I want to add to my colleague, and maybe analogy with Google or other big Western company is not good enough. I would say that in case of oligarchy and oligarchy in Ukraine, a more proper example would be India, a country run by private companies, Indian company, West Indian companies, when the whole mighty of the state, the judiciary, the decision of the government were transferred to private companies. That is example which is more appropriate to the history of Ukraine in 90s or like 10 years ago. It's not like that right now. The situation has changed. But it's not Google here. Oligarchs are not owners of Google, and they behave differently. And in case of the law, yeah, if it's adopted, or when it is adopted, there will be a grace period, and there will be a possibility and a message sent to oligarchs to stop their behavior. And after that, there will be some limitations. They are not like damaging consequences, meaning that there won't be any imprisonment or seizure of property, no. But there will be a register, the register will be public. There will be a ban on participation in big privatization. There will be an obligation to submit declaration on assets so that the whole ownership of all assets of all companies, including offshore companies, will be transparent and visible to the society. And more important, there will be an obligation of top officials to declare any meetings with oligarchs and the content of their conversation. It's like a bit of a part of regulation on lobbying. It introduces transparency to the behavior of oligarchs in the country. And again, there will be a chance to stop being oligarch. And our calculation, we expect that oligarchs will use this opportunity and become honest businessmen and will stop their involvement in politics.
We will come back to that. Oleksiy, я з вами повністю згоден, що олігархія – це не питання,
I agree with you that oligarchy is not an issue which actually appeared was created yesterday. We are talking a many-year period, and I do agree with you that the influence of oligarchs on the economy is really large. I call that period as chapter 1 for the economy of Ukraine. And perhaps we have to understand that that happened, that was the case. There were some kind of historical prerequisites for this kind of formation of this phenomenon, which could be avoided, but we failed to avoid that in Ukraine. So the question is, anyway, today, whether we wish that or not, oligarchization or de-oligarchization is going to be equal to the combating the influence on the economy. Maybe it would be kind of anti-corruption struggle, but first of all, we're talking about trying to avoid the effect on the economy. What do you visualize Ukraine after de-oligarchization? What Ukraine would be like in that case? First of all, I would like to draw attention to the following. I really appreciate the organizers when they compare our oligarchs with Google and other famous people. Yeah, I don't know where you took this kind of joke. You have to understand what is Ukrainian oligarch, how he came to exist, and how he earned his assets. This is actually the first difference of our oligarchs from those big-time businessmen which we have in our country. Just to give you a very simple example. Mr. Pinchuk started his activities in the YES Forum, if I'm not mistaken, back in 04 in July, right?
Він було, знаєте, так, це був липень.
Well, I believe that was July for sure. But in June there were certain events which took place. In June that year, we had a big auction to sell the Kryvyi metallurgical plant. And they bought for several certain amount of millions this facility, and then they resold that for $4.8 billion. Was there any influence of effect of some influential persons? I don't think so. But there was the kind of the onset of the oligarchy here. There were not so many. There were just few. If we're talking about the scale or the size of this country, and they do a lot today in order to stop other people calling them oligarchs. We can do that very quick. They have to stop to affect the politics using the money. This is a very fundamental, very critical, important things. We should stop to criticize our own officials. And number three, we have to stop to deal with monopoly. Maybe somebody will say that we should send this to the courts and adopt the anti-monopoly legislation and many other things. But we have to start with something. If we do not doing this now, we are going to have a lot of challenges. Once again, we are not talking about the people. We are talking about the challenge which our state faces. If we analyze the election process since 2004, if we take a look at our political system, which are actually fed by the oligarchy, when they decide to go to elections, they say that we are going to fight this oligarchical system. When they come to power, they forget about that. And the first who actually started to talk about that and take some actions it is President Zelensky. He doesn't have any commitments in face of those people. We can talk about that for a long time, but I would like everyone to understand ruination of the oligarch clan, corrupted system, which unfortunately, to much regret, exists here in Ukraine. This is number one task for us. If we do not do that, our crazy neighbors who are just on the threshold of our country, and they are going to make use of this situation, and they are going to continue the situation. And when we are talking about the 30 years of independence, or let's say restoration independence, this period can have a tragic finale, and so we have to talk not about the people, about the oligarchs. Thank you. We can continue this. Who you actually would like to see on this stage who could actually help you to negotiate this road? What kind of institutions you lack? What kind of institutions you would like to grow, so to say, in Ukraine? So that we do not have something like that in the future. Please understand we have to kind of a global talk, not dedicated to the past of our country. We have to understand what we are going to have in the future. The world is developing very quickly, and the Nord Stream 2 is the number one issue today. They compared it to some weapons, etc., but that was not born yesterday. It was born, emerged back in 2012. The Donetsk oligarch clan system came to power when they built this kind of a Russian enclave, when the citizen of Russian Federation and the secretary of the SBU actually was at power. You know, it's not my personal issue. I'm a small person. I'm just a secretary of the National Defense Security and Defense Council. If we had in 2012 the state which was not controlled, were not controlled by the Russian Federation, we could say, dear friends, what you are doing when our gas pipelines were used and were not involved or in the pan-European or the global market to ensure the guaranteed the necessary amount of gas for Europe. That was actually our mistake, but that mistake is based on the system which was built there. we have to definitely have some change here in all the issues in our country. I can give you an example of a decision taken by an SDC to put on the table for our population all the let's say mineral resources we have here in our country, and say what are you doing? You know what we have to do with that. And I can promise you that in a couple of weeks from now you see all this map of those resources.
The words about the risks. How Ukraine, what kind of actions Ukraine should do, Ukrainian authorities, in order to go through this narrow corridor, in your words, through anti-oligarchic process? How not to make any slippages to, maybe to some issues which could lead also to the risks for both business, economy, maybe even democracy?
Well, thank you for that question. I think, to me, this is critical, but I want to preface it by saying that there are risks in not doing anything either. So it's not like, I don't want to create the impression that, we have a bold law and it comes with a lot of risks, so it's better to be cautious. There are risks in not doing anything. And by the way, when I'm drawing the parallel to Google and Facebook, I'm not saying that, oh, it's normal, they're big businesses in the US. I'm drawing the opposite conclusion. We have to do something in the US as well. When the power of some corporations becomes so excessive, the risks of not doing anything are great as well. And thanks for bringing up the narrow corridor. And essentially the basic idea of that book, which I co-authored with James Robinson, is that you need both strong state institutions and strong civil society and democratic means of checking how those state institutions function. And critical in that process is trust. If you don't have trust in state institutions, the whole thing starts unraveling. So when I look at Ukraine, we have problems in all three of these areas. Ukraine has a very active population, shown by the two color revolutions and even before the collapse of the Soviet Union, protests and active engagement. And it has a democracy, but its democratic institutions and the bottom-up participation need to be strengthened. Its state institutions have a lot of weaknesses. I think part of the problem of oligarchization that you have identified is exactly because we cannot regulate and control corruption and misbehavior by big corporations. And then all of this comes, of course, bundled with a huge amount of mistrust in state institutions, again, bred by corruption high and low. So I think we have to take that background into account. If you have a law that empowers a particular council or a particular set of individuals within the state, and then you are not able to check them, I think that would be a problem. So it is a slippery slope if you empower individuals at the expense of institutions. So the question is, how can a law like this, or an anti-corruption, anti-oligarchy drive like this, turn into a way of strengthening state institutions? And here I think it starts with judicial institutions. There's nothing wrong in introducing new laws, but it's a problem if existing laws don't function. At some level, I think the problems that you have identified do require new measures, but there's no excuse for existing statutes that are antitrust, anti-corruption not functioning. And that creates another problem, because if the judicial branch is not functioning, then who is going to check the additional powers that are vested in the state? So I think in my mind, at the very least, any effort to deal with oligarchy has to be accompanied with even a stronger effort to strengthen judicial institutions. And those judicial institutions need to have enough independence to check the National Security and Defense Council, because who's going to worry about misbehavior in that council otherwise? And then all of this needs to be communicated and be part of a bottom-up process, because unless you have the buy-in of the civil society, none of this would actually work. So it needs to be a part of a three-pronged attack, and I think that's much more important than the overall intent or the details of the process, although those are very important. And I think the big danger here is not just that at the end we might create a more predatory state institutions. I think there is a danger of that. I don't think that's the biggest danger. I think the biggest danger is that this will be yet one more effort that misfired, and at the end it even reduces trust in institutions and the trust in the ability of Ukrainian institutions to deal with this endemic, pernicious problem of oligarchy.
Can I just intervene just very briefly with one thought? Again, as an outsider who doesn't know this issue as well as you guys do, I'm very struck, Justice Minister, again, by your notion that this can be done forensically and through transparent government actions and new laws. But what do we, then we have to judge deeds as well as words. And around the world, headlines were made when your government decided to go after one particular oligarch, Mr. Medvedchuk. And, you had your reasons for doing that, but do you think that sends a very useful signal when we're talking about this much more structural effort to de-oligarchize, to go after one particular individual who looks like he has an agenda which doesn't suit the current government, and therefore the current government uses its powers to go against him? You said we don't want to do it like they did it in Moscow in the early 2000s, where they went after a bunch of oligarchs they didn't like, who they felt were dangerous, and then they just created a whole new bunch of different oligarchs. Isn't what we see with Medvedchuk the beginnings of what might be a similar process in Ukraine?
Medvedchuk is not the only case of successful start of work and activities against oligarchy in Ukraine. For instance, you can easily ask the audience here whether, for instance, Kolomoisky feels the same, or whether he still has the level of influence he had, for instance, 2 years ago.
Does he?
1 year ago. Or, for instance, ask the audience about the influence of Firtash. So it's a systemic approach and not against one person only. And again, we desperately need a framework for those activities to offer oligarchs rules of the game. And again, it's important to understand that few oligarchs are interested in politics and media just to become richer and richer. Some of them, and it's were proved by many academics and on the West, and again, it's not only Ukrainian example, one of their major motivations is to protect their property from political involvement and from pressure, etc. It's like a shield, it's a protection, often misused. And the message shall be sent that they don't need that protection if they are honest and respected businessmen not involving in politics. So that's why I agree with my colleagues that we need not only that law on oligarchs, but also an independent judiciary, a strong anti-monopoly committee, regulation on lobbying, and many other initiatives to make this reform more complex. And we are doing that, actually, in the parliament. And there are many draft laws already submitted, and we expect that they will be adopted quite soon.
How would you describe the public's level of trust in those key institutions in Ukraine right now?
My feeling is that people of Ukraine trust Security Council significantly more than judiciary. And that
is absolutely not the way it should be.
Yeah, but we have what we have, and for the time being, each major case, each major fine imposed by Antimonopoly committee, well, it is cancelled in the judiciary system of Ukraine. So judges and courts do not allow Antimonopoly committee impose significant fines over big businesses in Ukraine. That is one example. And again, I'm talking about big businesses and corruption in Ukraine not always allowing to get fast results. Meaning, of course, we can take evolutionary way of dealing with oligarchs and their influence on politics, but we don't have time enough for that. our people demand results now. Otherwise, we will have all of us, no, I'm not saying about the majority in the parliament, but about the system of governance of Ukraine. It will be in a major danger if we don't show our people that we work on this problem, we bring results, and we fight in the influence of oligarchs in Ukraine.
Дякую. Олексію, я хотів би
Thank you, Oleksiy. At this point of time, I would like to follow up what Denis mentioned. He used several names, and you said that you would like to be very practical in this discussion and not just theoretize. The lack of this law today, or the absence of this law today, is it a problem, for example, in order to work somehow with Firtash and make him play money to Naftogaz, or, for example, if there are problems, or we had the problems around Kolomonsky from the point of view of Ukrenergo, the leak of this legislation. The absence of this law is in your way, let's say, or your council or some institutions to find those abuses. Another question, for example, in the banking sphere, many oligarchs did not support their banks. Back in 2016, they went bankrupt, those banks, and the taxpayers, they actually covered the losses of those banks with their own money, and they actually had to pay the money back to those who had the money in those banks. How are you going to do those banks which became bankrupt? The same people actually are indebted dozens of billions of hryvnia, and they do not pay it to the state banks. So the absence of this law that prevents you to do something in this case. First of all, I would like to offer a short comment what Malyuska said. As DC, the private institution which pays attention to the problems available. If there are some big problems, we pay attention to that. Speaking about the names which were voiced here, first of all, Medvedchuk, doesn't pose any problem or is not associated with the problem of some oligarchs. He is a person who is under the investigation for the high treason. Actually, when we did not pay attention in previous years when this minister became unexpectedly vice speaker or deputy speaker in our parliament, maybe we wouldn't have this kind of trouble today. Speaking about Mr. Firtash, we're a very strange situation. Austria is a very advanced country, member of the EU, which for 7 years gives the permission to reside in that country to this person. This is a very strange thing. And I would say that we could do something much faster if you were talking about the multi-million dollar, let's say, amount of money which they had to pay for this kind of an Indian, let's say, deal associated with India. As regards answering your question about the absence of this law, we understand and we openly say that unfortunately this system is very weak. It's not the system which we would like to have in order to very quickly respond to the process which take place in the Central Energo or some other, let's say, businesses. You mentioned that Kolomonsky, he was not the owner of the Bank of Ukraine. We would not say anything about that. They actually continue to embrace those offices, and they have to together to go towards those processes which we are talking about regarding different persons including Kolomonsky. Doing this work today, it's very difficult to say, but what happens in the bank system today, it's no surprise. 96 billion which we paid with our own money, because some of the owners underpay something. And the next case, which could be considered by our Security and Defense Council, following the instruction of the President, we do not have some money, and some additional oligarchs appeared. And if you're talking about the situation in this country, there are things which have to be absolutely publicized. Coming back to oligarchs, I would like to say that indeed they work really very carefully. They're very respected people, something which for dozens of years in Ukraine, for this, let's say, they need some time in order to accumulate their, let's say, land banks. They made use of this opportunity offered by the corrupted Verkhovna Rada, which refused for a long time about the free sale of the land. And plus it happened, and this is a very powerful step, and we have at least 2 or 3 oligarchs in the agrarian sphere who build their system on to the fact that our legislation in last December, when our MV said that no, you cannot actually govern, let's say, do something with your ownership. You have to do something along the lines.
This has been a fascinating conversation, and I know there are going to be people who want to contribute as well. And Anders, you're in the front row, and you've been looking at this issue as an independent-minded observer for many, many years. We would love just a thought and a question from you to this panel that brings so much experience to the matter.
Yeah, thank you. First, I would like to start with a definition of an oligarch in Ukraine. An oligarch is a person who's strong enough to be able to defend even a big enterprise that is his property against the predatory state. And that takes me to the state is the big problem. The state here is completely lawless. That comes out very well from this discussion. That's where we need to start. Without rule of law and a functioning judiciary, you can't have a normal market. And that means that you have to use the influence with the state in order to get anything done. And then turning to the law, and this is particularly for you, Minister, I see this as lots of people have $80 million here, a few hundred, and political influence, we don't know, and everybody has it. So what is special? It's the media ownership. So an oligarch, so-called, would have to sell his media. To whom can he sell the media? No foreigner will enter this country to own media. No Russian is allowed sensibly. So who can buy it? The state or the ruling party? Isn't this just about, I think Steve said it, what Putin did in the early 2000s, to take away the ownership from Vladimir Gosinski and Boris Berezovsky in forced deals and transferring it not to the state eventually, but to Putin's oligarchs. So what I see, what you suggest here is not a third way, but it is Putin's way, or what Darren has been talking about is the Western way. What's your comment? Thank you.
Well, firstly, I would like to say, that recently Vladimir Alexandrovich made a speech and talked about a dragon. So maybe if you have some mistaken opinion that there is a new dragon that may emerge in Ukraine, you are mistaken. Despite all those processes going on in our country, like in 1991, when students went out on a protest, it was in 2004, when the government acted really badly, and it was in 2014. I will give you an example from my life. It was in 2013. There was a day when those events were unfolding in Vilnius, when those agreements were not signed, and all those people who were There, they were in the airport, and we've been waiting for the airplane, and Oleksiy was there standing and crying. And I asked her, and I asked her why, and she said, "Well, we were looking forward to signing this agreement." And I told her, "Stop crying. It only begins." When it all started, when it all began, unfortunately, it took lives of people, and unfortunately, they lied to us also in 2014. So when we had the electoral revolution in 2019, we brought it to the higher level, and this is the achievement that we have today. Can you imagine people sitting here and talking about oligarchs under the ruling of Poroshenko or Yanukovych? They just, the oligarchs need to decide whether they are politicians or businessmen. Can the big business support the politics? It can, but it should be public. It should not be in pockets or in cases. You just make the contributions, you pay to the membership fees and support that publicly, as everyone else in the world does.
All right, yeah, get hands up, everybody, because we've got lots of contributions I can tell from the floor. Let's make them as brief as we can. We'll take a few at one time. So you go for it, and then we'll get the mic to other people.
Thank you. First, I'm a French. I'm very surprised because, in fact, this law will be absolutely illegal in France, anti-constitutional. And you have to know that the last time we made a register for a certain category of the population, it was in 1941 when we collaborated with the Nazis. And since that, we have never made a register like you do, with the purpose which is just, in fact, to fight against the relation between influential people and media. Because the only way, as you said, to get out from the list is to sell media, because you will not go out from the list by selling your business or by becoming less rich. It doesn't make any sense. So I really think that we are, as an investor in Ukraine, I am quite shocked by what you said, to be frank. Because I see something which is much more linked to populism, much more linked to the fact that you want to offer to the population, as you say, idea of fast and quick results, and you don't take care about the effect of what you are doing. Build strong institutions, reinforce anti-corruption committee, reinforce anti-monopoly system, makes sense, and we all agree with that. But doing like you do, a category which has to be registered with a type of crazy name and shame, with the effect that maybe as an investor I will support your law because it means that in the privatization a lot of rich Ukrainians will be no more able to participate, which means that as a foreign investor I will have a privilege. No, frankly speaking, it is a nonsense, and I expect from you, a very democratic government, to understand that the terrible image that you will create for the foreigners is not a good asset for Ukraine. Thank you.
Right, well...
Okay.
Yeah, why don't you respond to that first?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the draft law envisages a carrot and a stick to a certain extent for unbundling. We are not intending to take away property. It's just a simple anti-monopoly reaction when a person has assets in politics, in media, and in business. And that merger makes our country very weak. We cannot build strong institutions when those institutions are financed by oligarchs. That's easy. When we're talking about media, there is no any intent to take media to the ownership of the state or businesses affiliated to the current ruling party or whatever. The simple answer to that question is that media in Ukraine are not simple media. This is like gas for Russia. Gas for Russia, natural gas, is not simply natural gas. It's a weapon. The same applies to media in Ukraine. It's a political weapon. Sometimes this weapon shoots, sometimes this weapon is silent. But nevertheless, it's still a weapon, it's overpriced. This is not a business. There is almost no any businesses in media. The expenditures on keeping media operational significantly exceeds the profit.
When you say that, you kill democracy. Democracy, I mean,
Yes,
media are always weapons everywhere. In the US,
we are talking
a weapon
about
in
Ukraine.
England, in
Ukraine
France, in
has
Germany.
unique circumstances.
Of
We are not
media are
France.
weapon.
We are not France when you have
Minister,
strong institutions.
You're getting a bit of reaction here. I want to get this debate followed through. So come on, rather than just waving your arms around, do you not want to follow? I want to understand the nature of this argument you're having. So come back.
No, but you know, I mean, I'm so surprised because you say media are not a usual business. Of course, I mean, it's media everywhere. So the fact that media have to follow the rule of law, the fact that you take anti-monopoly, anti-concentration, or protection from foreign investment and foreign influence in the media makes sense, and we do it in all the democracy. We do it in French. But we will never do a law like you do. Never. Never, because you consider that you have to interfere with the internal political games, not with a foreign influence. If you want to kill foreign influence, take a law against foreign investment in the media. It's okay. I mean, it's happened in the US, in France, in England, everywhere. But what you are doing, it's totally different, and believe me, it's against the rule of democracy.
Okay, I want to get...
Я перепрошую.
Quick then, Oleksiy.
Can I please?
We do want to get the audience involved. There's a lot of passion in this debate, and I want to hear it. But quickly then, you give us your thoughts quickly.
My colleague from France here says the word standards, right, rules. We are really looking forward to these, to ensure those standards. France has its standards, they are very distinguished, but we have monitored the situation when in 2008, after Ukraine, after Russia started the war against Georgia. Unfortunately, no one talked about that in France. This is the level of standards we're talking about, right?
I want a different mix of voices. I certainly want to hear a woman's voice right now. So you, ma'am, you've got your hand up.
Thank you so much. My name is Yalta European Strategy.
Я депутатка. У нас чудова дискусія, і мені дуже подобається ця дискусія. Маю сказати,
I understand where the law on oligarch comes from. I understand that we want, correct and fast changes for a very hard choice and for a very hard problem. But I do want to thank Mr. Acemoglu because you said one of the phrases that is, very dear to my heart, that the law on oligarchs should not destroy institutions, but actually should help to build them. And for me, the concern is not on the law on oligarchs, but the concern is that this is not the only law that doesn't work with institutions and tries to find the other way. And I will just give you a short example and then a short question. For example, 2 days ago, Verkhovna Rada has voted another law. I did not vote. It was a law on the National Bank of Ukraine, because we are very afraid, frankly, that Oleksiy will have an influence on big companies, big lawyers, big courts, and the courts will use their power, because the institution is not built, to fire the good people, let's say, from the National Bank of Ukraine. So what we decide to do, we decide to take away every norm from the law on the National Bank, that a criminal record is not in compliance with somebody who works in the National Bank. So now, if we adopt the law, people who has a criminal record, the person who has a record, still can be in the position in the National Bank, because we do not trust the courts, and because we are afraid that Oleksiy will use the courts against us. So my concern is, it is a never-ending story, right? Where does the story end? Where is the choice between the rule of law and fast results? Where does this end?
I believe in building institutions. I saw here that we have like 8 minutes, but if I may ask, let's extend as possible, just to accommodate a few questions. So we have here Ludmila, we have Francis, we have Arkady, at least, these are free. Ludmila.
Good afternoon. I'm the Parliamentary Ombudsperson for Human Rights, and I exercise parliamentary oversight over constitutional rights and freedoms. The rhetoric now is, okay, Denisova is speaking out for the oligarchy. I would like to qualify this by making a couple of statements. A, an oligarch and the whole oligarchy is not about individuals, it's about the state. Yes, I quite appreciate that they may exert significant influence, but we are talking about human rights at the end of the day. And no person should be subject to any limitation of their rights by virtue of the fact that they hold substantial assets. But I don't know why Mr. Malyuska expressed it that way. It's that if somebody owns a media channel and they will have to part ways with that asset in 6 months' time, and they will become bona fide businessmen, but they may be bona fide already now. What is the problem I see with this law? It's a clear case of overreach on the part of the Security and Defense Council and the Presidency. It will certainly be up to Parliament to dot all the I's and cross all the T's over this matter. But I would like to remind you of is an opinion by the Venice Commission giving a definition of the rule of law, expressly stating that the paramount principle of the rule of law is legal certainty. So if there's certain powers being devolved or conferred on a certain institution, and they need to be clearly stipulated, and if a decision is made to impose restrictions on an individual's rights, they should have the right to legal recourse. They should have the right to defend themselves. So I'm here to defend the right of each and every individual in our rule-based democratic nation.
There was a strong opposition to the draft law, sometimes pushed by oligarchs themselves, hiding behind some political forces. And the first reaction of opposition to this draft law was, it's just smoke and mirrors, nothing serious. Oligarchs will just smile at your draft law, they won't be hurt, there won't be any impact, you're just pretending you fight oligarchs. Well, we say, okay, but then vote for it. If it's nothing serious, just vote with us. Vote for this draft law. And then, now, when it's time to vote for the law in the final reading, final second reading, all of a sudden, position of opposition suddenly changed, completely changed. Now it became a rampant violation of human rights. It's too serious, it's too dangerous. We cannot allow to such violation of human rights in our country, in our freedom. It's a danger to the civil society. We can't allow that. Why this happened? This happened just because from the first instance, the purpose of this criticism was not to get, better law, but to block existing law. And arguments don't really matter. This is just a fight to block the draft law from being adopted, and that's it.
I obviously don't have a dog in this fight, but I'm just interested when you hear people on the floor saying the problem here is that you're making a big show, maybe even as somebody put it, a populist show of going after the biggest fish, the richest Ukrainians, the oligarchs. It's a big show, but the problem is that the key institutional strengthening that should be happening. I mean, you're the Justice Minister. You've told me that there are profound problems with all of the institutions, the courts, the rule of law system. In your own words, it doesn't really work and people don't believe it in Ukraine today. And maybe the message is you should be addressing that much more seriously than making a big show of going after the wealthiest at the very top. Because if you do that without doing the rest, you're building a building with very weak foundations.
Yeah, exactly. And we are doing that, as I said. There is judicial reform going on. There is a reform on anti-monopoly regulation going on. Everything is in process. But if we just repeat what has been done before, we will get the same results. And it's impossible to build strong institutions right now fast enough with having oligarchs by our side competing over influence on those institutions. Without that involvement, without corruption money going here and there, the task to build strong institutions will be much simpler. And immediately after oligarchs stop involving in politics and brainwashing people from media, we will be able to build strong institutions in a year or two. That would be easy task. But if we say judiciary is fully independent, that's it. That is true, they are independent. We cannot involve in the judiciary process, but they are independent to choose who will pay them salary. And the ability of oligarchs to pay shady salary is much more significant than the official salary paid by the government, paid by the state budget. How to compete with that? And if it's a massive problem, if it's not about one person or two people, it's about thousands of state officials. We cannot change the system fast enough without dealing with core problem. And core problem in Ukraine is a measure of big businesses, government, and media.
I will just come in 1 minute. I would agree with some of you, Denis, but I just want to maybe refer what to Oleksiy said about the banking sector. You know, being the deputy governor of central bank that time and being recognized later as a result of the transformation of the central bank and reform of banking sector, you know, being recognized as one of the best central banks in the world, one of the most transparent central banks in the world. It's praised by all the international institutions that the central bank did this job, you know, also fighting with oligarchs that time. There was no need of this law first, and second is there is much more needed to be done. Again, you know now that we are fighting with asset recovery for the state, and again, I would agree with many people who said that really we need to build the institutions to improve that, and this takes time for sure, and just we need to avoid that we miss time to build that as well. So, Alena, you know.
I have a question to Mr. Malyuska. You said that the media in Ukraine is not a business. As CEO of a media company, why don't you think that Ukrainian media is not a business enterprise?
That it could be a good business. It could be even a profitable business in Ukraine. But what I see is shady salaries paid in envelopes for big media stars, and very low salaries declared them and recorded by state tax inspectorate. What I see is that, well, our media are very cool. Our talk shows, our content generated by media companies could not be really compared to the official finances spent on those media. And it's not my opinion, and I'm not a huge expert on media business, but I talked to many people, and actually their conclusion was pretty much like that. There is a shady part of keeping big media business operational in Ukraine. I'm not talking about all media businesses, particularly on businesses not covering political issues, political discussions. This is a bit a different part of the story. But if we are talking about media covering politics, in most cases, there is this shady part of financing of those businesses.
Очень обидно, это неправда.
I find this quite offensive, and this is not true. If this is how you are approaching it, I'm very sorry about that. We do not pay salaries in those envelopes, as opposed to some other entities, including within government. We are a profitable business enterprise, and we pay our fair share of taxes.
Suggest to have a general meeting of general gathering of all heads of big media companies in Ukraine and me, and with a special equipment, checking whether we are saying truth or not. Saying who is taking shady salary or not. Me, personally, as a minister, any shady salary in envelope through 2 years of my work experience, and heads, for instance, big media holdings, whether they got any salary not official recorded by state tax administration.
Я вам рассказываю про Starlight Media.
I'm telling you about Starlight Media. We do not have...
I'm saying about most companies, most big companies, and not saying that there is no any example of honest business.
How do you identify them? But if you then you can maybe some of those are not genuine business enterprises.
Here, online with online translation, please ask experts from abroad, trusted people who can bring special equipment, checking whether a person is lying or not, and let's ask about shady salaries. I am ready to participate.
Well, that is a pretty extraordinary idea, and it probably is going to generate a lot of conversation long after this panel is finished. Get in. I'm going to turn to you, ma'am, and then to you, sir, because you've been very patient with that arm up for a long time. But then quite soon, we're probably going to have to, unfortunately, because this is so interesting, we're going to have to draw this to a close. But you go, ma'am.
Is it on? Yes, on. So thank you. My name is Svetlana Zalishuk. I'm a former member of parliament. And as a Ukrainian, I would like to say that, in my mind, anti-monopoly and anti-oligarchic political efforts are absolutely indispensable for this country to survive and to be successful, without a doubt. Is there any surprise that there are Kolomoisky Akhmetov's bunch of MPs are sitting in the parliament and voting for the most important legislation in this parliament? No. Is there a surprise that the budget sometimes over New Year times is being cooked by the oligarchs? No. And I think, and personally, I do not feel awkward that I'm talking about this in this room, because we are kindly invited by Victor Pinchuk, who actually holds this status of oligarch, right? I think that we are here in this room to talk not only about post-pandemics. I think we are here in this room to talk about most challenging topics for this country and to find the right answer. So, without a doubt, I support that there are initiatives, anti-monopoly and anti-oligarch initiatives. However, the questions have to be asked. And the conclusions of this conversation, that is very critical, and I think the government is listening to this criticism from business, from the internationals, from experts, and from journalists. To what extent these efforts will work? To what extent they're just PR actions? And I'll tell you why there is so much skepticism about it. Because there is one MP who could have been drunk and violated правила дорожнього руху. Help me. Rules, safety rules on the road. There is a big skepticism why he is not properly investigated and being punished, while he is, by the way, coming from the power. So of course there is skepticism. How this anti-monopoly policy will actually work. So to conclude, you know, we need honest conversation, without a doubt. We need new rules and we need new institutions. But there is a big question and big skepticism. How will it work? Thank you.
I think Darren said in the center that it was about the trust. I mean, just to maybe intervene in this discussion, the answer is not to come and personally discuss, but again, referring to the banking sector experience, I should tell you that there was a process built in the institution to define the business models of the banks, and if there is a business model which is done according by rules, this is a legitimate business. If there is no business model, like it was with clear ownership structure of the owners, like it was with related parties in the banking sector, so you need to fix it, and you have time for that. If you don't do it, you go out from the market. And I think this is the answer. I will come to you in the end, Darren, with just with your advice, what not to do maybe. But we have a few questions. You know, Arkady, Sergey, and Francis, and let's finish it, okay, if possible.
Yeah. So let's get several voices in. I don't know who's got the microphones right now. We've got one here. We've got one over there. Yep.
It's my preference to speak in Ukrainian, so it's, please use interpretation. I would like to act as a voice in favor of de-oligarchization on this panel, because those defending it are a minority here, and it is the whole notion of my current position with my hat as a representative of the state on the board of directors of a public company, and when I have been consistently involved as a journalist in defending this since my time as journalist. But as time goes on, I only become more and more sort of invested in this and these values. I would like to cite one specific example how de-oligarchization has resulted in positive financial outcomes. I'm talking about the National Railway Company, and it is replete with vested interest and oligarchic interest. One of the areas of abuse is the payment that oligarchs make to get their cargo moved by rail. And Mr. Oslund, who served on the board of directors and on that company, and over the decades, not only within the space of 1 year, has been grappling with very low tariffs being paid to haul iron ore, being one of the biggest sources of income for several oligarchic clans, Akhmetov's clan, and to a lesser extent Expo, Sukhaya Balka, owned by Mr. Yaroslavsky. Several very powerful families in Ukraine are earning super profits because they are paying very cheap freight to haul their or by rail. And this summer, only after real discussions began within society to curb oligarchic influences, this whole debate began how to put institutional pressure on oligarchs. We saw a very different reaction on the part of those who set those freight rates for iron ore. I'm not only talking about iron ore, but that is probably the most flagrant example, if you will. Before the 17th of September 2021. So the first time iron ore has been hauled for the first time at a rate that is at least at break-even. It's always been a loss-making activity. Now, there are 40 countries in the world with a population smaller than the staff, the personnel of Ukrainian railways, but this is a big enterprise, a big corporation that has been consistently, persistently subsidizing oligarchs. And this actually looks back to this entire discussion around the oligarchization, which has produced 20 billion hryvnias in additional revenues for Ukrainian railways. This is where a discussion leads to tangible results, not just on a little sort of conceptual stage. But basically, I certainly respect Mr. Fuchs, and now in those countries, in France, you have public broadcasting that creates a level playing field for all political parties and other forces, and that is the most popular platform for political debates. Unfortunately, Ukraine is different from that perspective, and it's because public officials indeed live in fear of being destroyed by media channels owned by those oligarchs. So many initiatives have been sort of voted down simply because I think that this market, my vote is in favor of de-oligarchization and anti-monopoly legislation and other things and judicial reform, but we need to make this move.
It was not a bad discussion. I do hope it is not the end of the discussion, but maybe the start of the discussion. And it's unfortunately we need to wrap up. And I want to thank the participants. If someone wants to continue this discussion after that, we may go there. And I think we need to leave the time for next panels.
Well, Vlad, yeah, thank you. I mean, we have a president waiting to talk to us, and we better not keep her waiting any longer. I know there's still so many comments in the room, so much conversation still to be had. I think, Vlad, you're absolutely right. This is one that will continue for sure. I would just ask you not to continue it for the next half hour because we've got a fascinating debate in here, but then definitely this conversation, this subject needs to be continued in Ukraine, and doubtless it will be. But we've had a terrific panel discussion. Vladislav, thank you very much to you. Thank you to our three panelists. You've spoken frankly, you've given us insights into your thinking, and we've got real insights into the thinking of many other Ukrainians as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, give our panel a very, very warm thank you. Thanks a lot, guys.